So tonight we had the privilege of celebrating Israel and the occasion of its 75 years of independence as a Jewish and democratic state. The story of Israel, as we know, is one of many colors, is one of ongoing conflicts and challenges, but also of overcoming the odds, of inspiration, innovation, creativity, and great accomplishments. As an Israeli citizen, as a former Israeli ambassador, and as a mom of two young Israelis with a lot of chutzpah, I share the deep concern that many of you have here and many in the Israeli society have of what is happening today in Israel. But I remind myself on a daily basis the miracle of our young state and of the fact that we do not have another homeland. Tonight, we have the opportunity to look back on Israel's short yet remarkable history, consider Israel's present situation, and look into our crystal ball and share our expectations, our hopes, and our fears of what is expected in Israel's future. For this conversation, I'm so privileged to be joined by two individuals who have dedicated their professional lives to Israel and to the Jewish community. Dr. Mijal Bitton is a sociologist, a spiritual entrepreneur, and as Rosh Kehillah, community leader of the downtown Minyan in New York City, and scholar in residence at the Shalom Hartman Institute. She's committed to building vibrant and welcoming traditional Jewish life. A researcher of Sephardic Jewry, Mijal earned her doctorate from New York University, where she is now directing the first national study of Sephardic Jews in the United States. Thank you, Mijal, for being here. And Dr. Michael Koplow is the Chief Policy Officer of Israel Policy Forum, and also serves as a Senior Research Fellow of the Kogot Research Center at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. Before coming to Israel Policy Forum, he was the founding program director of Israel Institute. He holds a PhD in government from Georgetown University, where he specialized in political development and ideology and the politics of Middle Eastern states. Welcome, Michael. So they cut our time of the panel. I see how it's, from 30 to 25 to 20 minutes, so let's rush right into the first question. Throughout Israel's short history, there have been several moments that have come to define the country and what it is today. As we look back at the past 75 years, is there a particular moment that for you personally encapsulates Israel and its history? Michael, let's start with you.
So thank you, Marina, and thank you to ADL for having me here tonight. So for me, the microphone not working? Right. So for me, the moment that encapsulates Israel's history in a way that I find very meaningful, and particularly in terms of looking ahead, is November 1977, when Anwar Sadat came to Jerusalem and addressed the Knesset. And for Israel and for Israelis, this was an important thing. It demonstrated that after 3 decades of nearly nonstop war and nonstop fighting, Israel was not necessarily destined to live by the sword forever. It demonstrated that Israel could be integrated into its region. It could be accepted, something that Israel and Israelis were desperately seeking ever since the founding of the state. It demonstrated that Israel could hold out its hand to other countries for peace, and that hand could be accepted. And 1977 is also important because it introduced a number of concepts that we are still grappling with today. The peace treaty with Egypt wasn't just about a peace treaty with Egypt. It also incorporated the idea that there should be peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And so this is something that we are still obviously grappling with today. There are still questions today about what it means to be at peace. The peace with Egypt is still a relatively cold peace in contrast to what we've seen recently with the Abraham Accords, which is much more of a societal peace, a people-to-people peace. And so that too is another question we're grappling with today. What does it look like to actually have peace, and what are some of the trade-offs that have to happen? and this concept of land for peace, something that today for many Israelis is controversial. Many Israelis look at this idea of land for peace and they look at Oslo and they think that it has failed, but in many ways the foundation of peace between Israel and its neighbors as encapsulated in the Israel-Egyptian peace treaty, which came out of this visit in 1977, is based on this formula. And this too is a question that Israel is grappling with today. So I think it's a wonderful moment in Israeli history, showed the best of Israel, showed, I think, the future that Israel could have, but also introduced a number of questions that Israel is still dealing with today and will be dealing with, I think, into the future.
Mijal, what's your moment?
So, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. What a pleasure to celebrate Israel's 75th birthday. 1977 was also the year in which an Israeli prime minister from the right was elected for the first time, Menachem Begin. And I want to tell you about a moment, a speech that Menachem Begin gave in 1981 in what is now known as Rabin Square in Tel Aviv, a speech that is not well known but really, really important. Begin was running for re-election. And the night before this speech, in June 27th, 1981, the opposition, led by a young Shimon Peres, also had a rally in this Rabin Square. And a comedian called Dudu Topaz, have you heard of Dudu Topaz? He got up on this stage and he started making the case to thousands of people as to why they should vote for Shimon Peres. And he also made a lot of fun of Menachem Begin. And the main source of humor that he found was actually to make fun of Begin's Mizrahi supporters. He called them chachchachim, which was a derogatory term to talk about the lower class, Middle Eastern and North African Jews, who he said were the base of the Likud. And he said, us here in this square, we are the Israel Yafa, the beautiful Israel, the elite secular Ashkenazi camp that he was leading. The next night, Begin gets up on stage. You can find this on YouTube. The speech is magnificent. And he repeats Dudu Topaz's words. And he says, what Dudu Topaz just did is a desecration of God's name. There should be no division between Mizrahim, Ashkenazim, we're all siblings. And he said that he was proud to have Mizrahim, he used the term chachchachim, to have them in his camp. 2 days later, Menachem Begin won re-election. Now, I'm sharing this not to make any political point about the right or the left in Israel of 1981 or 2023. I'm sharing this because this one speech reveals to us really difficult truths that we have to remember, especially now on Israel's 75th birthday. We have to remember that at the creation of any state, no matter how magnificent, how miraculous, like he said, at the beginning of any state, any enterprise, there are always some people who are left behind. We have to remember this speech because we have to remember that Israel is right now still a country that is not only at war with external factors, right, with external enemies, but that actually is made up of internal contradictions, of competing dreams that are going on right now. Is Israel secular Tel Aviv, sacred Jerusalem? Is it East? Is it West? Mizrahi, Ashkenazi, there are all these contradictions that are going on there. And if we're going to celebrate the birthday right now, we're going to look back at the last 75 years, plan for the next 75 more, and even more, God willing, and ask ourselves, what is our responsibility right now to continue the work to prepare, to make sure that we bring back into the shared story those who were left behind, and ask ourselves, where can we find strength from these competing narratives to build a stronger and more flourishing Israel?
So let me continue. Continue your thought to today's most hot topic in Israel, right? The judicial reform. So in the Israeli newspaper, The Marker, they had a special issue for Yom HaAtzmaut a few days ago, and the headline said, and I quote, Israel is celebrating 75 while she's torn and bleeding more than ever before. But the gift she has received for its birthday could save her from herself. End of quote. So while many claim that this is the end of Israel as we know it today, and we're going down the cliff, others see it as an opportunity to actually bridge the gaps in Israeli society and perhaps create a new national ethos. So how do you see this playing on? We're for
I'm happy
we're
to
for
start.
gender equity, Michael. So
Yes.
we'll give you the right to start.
So, to me, what has taken place over the past few months in Israel is indeed an enormous crisis. I think it's the biggest crisis Israel has faced in its history. It's, of course, not a military crisis, but it is a crisis not just about Israeli society, but about the nature of the Israeli state, what state institutions will look like, things that should have been worked out at the very beginning of the state and were not. And so I don't downplay at all the severity of what we're seeing inside of Israel. I think that there is a version of how this ends where Israelis can come together, where the different sides of the political spectrum can come together, can agree on what the principles of judicial overhaul should look like. That effort is, of course, underway right now under the auspices of President Bougie Herzog. I'll say that I'm not terribly optimistic that the two sides are going to come to a compromise, and the question is then, what happens next? And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu certainly has calculations to make. They're not easy ones. I think that whatever direction he goes in, he's going to find himself in a tough political spot. But I think the way to think about this, with all respect to my Israeli friends and colleagues who are in the streets and talking about Israeli dictatorship, I don't think that that's how this ends, irrespective of what happens with the judicial overhaul. I think Israelis are fighting about two different visions of democracy. I will be open and say that one of these visions of democracy appeals to me more. It's a vision of democracy where you have a strong system of checks and balances. It's a system of democracy where you have strong guarantees of minority rights. It's a system of democracy where everything is in balance and there is general compromise. But there's another outcome for this, which is that Israel will continue to be democratic. It will continue to have free and fair elections. And once those elections happen, governments will do as they please, and the check on them will be the people. It will be the next election. And that is certainly a form of democracy. And so I don't downplay the crisis that we are seeing, but I also think it's important to make sure we understand what's involved. It really is two different visions of democracy. And I also think it's different visions of what we mean for a Jewish state. Israel will remain a Jewish state. The question is it going to be a Jewish state primarily for Jewish citizens of Israel? Or is it going to be a Jewish state that Jews from around the world, and certainly we're sitting here in the United States, certainly a state where North American Jews can feel not only that they are welcome and that they're embraced, but that their Jewish values are ones that play out in the state of Israel. So this certainly is a big moment. There are questions about democracy and Israel as Jewish, but I think that it's important to frame it in a way that really takes into account everything happening in this moment and what may happen down the road.
I'll just add, the rabbis in the Talmud said that at the end of the beginning of the Second Temple, prophecy ended. So there is no prophecy. Israel will become what its people and its supporters lead it to be. And I think we have to remind ourselves that we have the moral responsibility and agency to face what you just said, Michael, is one of the biggest crises that we have faced. And that if we really, I believe that if we work together, diaspora Jews, Jews in Israel, those who believe, especially in the vision of liberal democracy that I think you mentioned right now, I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic seeing the resurgence of civic society in Israel, people who are going into the streets, who are raising up really difficult questions that remain dormant for decades, that are critical to be reckoned with in order for us to move forward. And I believe that if we all continue to insist that, the desert might take 40 years, right, for us to cross, but if we continue to work together and move forward, that will come closer to the promised land.
So you mentioned the diaspora Jews, and I hear that question over and over again here in the States and from other Jewish communities around the world. What is the role of diaspora Jews today, And does the current government of Israel care what the Jews abroad think?
After that.
Go ahead.
Role of diaspora is so easy. Listen, I think there's so much here. I was just rereading, I was reading a biography of Ben Gurion going through 1948. Israel wouldn't exist today without the philanthropic and other type of support of Jews around the world who were there to support Israel. Now, to me, this doesn't mean that those who vote in Israeli elections and who pay taxes and who send their kids to the IDF, that those of us who care and see ourselves as stakeholders in Israel, but don't do those same things, that we have the same level of having a say in the things that happen in that, within Israel. And honestly, by the way, if we really wanted to change certain trends in Israel, if all of us here in this room and other places would move to Israel, that would be the most effective way, let's be honest here, but we also are needed here. Okay, the most effective way to make a change. But listen, I think I view myself personally as having a relationship with Israel that is unconditional. Unconditional doesn't mean uncritical. I view myself as really thinking of as a stakeholder in the magnificent project that is Israel, which has repercussions for Jews around the world. So I think all of us need to continue working and especially partnering with Israeli Jews on the ground, who see what's around them, who understand Israel from the inside, don't always have the American lenses superimposed upon reality, and to partner and to support and to help as much as possible from here.
Michael?
So, Mijal said that prophecy ended thousands of years ago, and perhaps it did, perhaps it didn't. But I think that we as North American Jews actually have an important role to play when it comes to Israel, and that is to be prophets. In Jewish tradition, the prophetic tradition, the prophets are the ones who try to be the moral center, who try to push the people forward, try to uphold a certain set of standards, even if those standards may be unrealistic, even if those standards may be unachievable. Israeli Jews and Israeli non-Jews have a very difficult time. They live in a rough part of the world, and they have to make choices and compromises, and we all here as Zionists, we're aware of what those choices and compromises are. I think that our role as American Jews is to support our Israeli friends and relatives and colleagues, but I also think that we need to serve as prophets. We need to set forth a vision of Zionism that may be a more aspirational one. In some sense, we have it easy. We don't have to live with the responsibility that Israelis have to live with, because we are not faced with the reckoning of some of the choices that we may want them to make. But the fact that we don't have that responsibility and that we don't have to live with the consequences also provides us an opportunity. It provides us an opportunity to set forth a vision and hope that Israel can start to move toward that vision, understanding that it will be difficult, understanding that Israelis have a much more challenging set of circumstances than we do in many ways. And so I think we can keep holding Israel to this prophetic vision and understand that Israel may fall short, but that we ourselves shouldn't drop that vision for Israel, because I think both us and Israelis ultimately want to see the most perfect, the most expansive vision of Zionism that we can have.
Thank you, Michael. So we only have a few minutes left, so I'll jump right to the last question. And for us to end on a very positive note, what gives you hope as you look into the next 75 years and beyond of the state of Israel? Michael, go ahead.
So there are a few things that give me hope. One thing that gives me hope is something that we are seeing take place in Israel right now, which is hundreds of thousands of Israelis, if not millions of Israelis, who care about their future on both sides, on the right and the left, the religious and the secular, those who are in favor of judicial overhaul and those who are opposed to judicial overhaul. They're making their voices heard. They're out in the streets. They are taking their democracy seriously. They're taking their civil society seriously. And we should all be zocha. We should all be privileged to live in a place where people care about their futures so intently that they are willing to show up in the hundreds of thousands at the drop of a hat to stand up for their principles and stand up for what they believe in. And the other thing that gives me hope is that with all of the challenges Israel faces, we are sitting here in the American Jewish community, and this is an overwhelmingly Zionist community, not only in this room. For all the challenges between Israel and the diaspora, this relationship remains strong, and I think it will remain strong for another 75 years at least. And so I am strengthened myself by the fact that this Israeli diaspora partnership, which, as Mijal said, was so integral in the early years of the state to the establishment of Israel, remains strong and will continue to remain strong.
I was speaking with an American Christian friend of mine, talking about Israel, and I told him that in my biggest nightmares, I think about a civil war, okay, happening in Israel. And he got really upset with me. It's like, don't say the word civil war. I'm like, why? He said, well, you know, I know a lot of people in the far right in America who are they're the ones talking about civil war. But in the American context, they're advocating for it. And they're talking about how good it would be to actually break up. And I told him, well, you know, in the Israeli context, there's so many people right now who are talking about civil war, but they're talking about it from a place of concern and a place of saying we have to be able to build bridges and we have to be able to work towards a vision of a common good. So I've been in the presence of so many courageous people who are combining fighting for their principles and their commitments. They're not neutral on the sidelines, and at the same time, they're insisting that we have to be able to have an expansive sense of we, and have to be able to build bridges in different parts of Israeli society, and really strengthen the social fabric of the state of Israel. So.
Thank you, Mijal. So I'll just mention that, of course, ADL is doing exactly that in Israel. And when I was asked by one of the leaders here present and a good friend, what can I do to support Israel today? So I told him, you're already doing it because you're supporting ADL, who's first defending Israel here in the US and around the world, and also working very hard in Israel to create those bridges and bring together the different parts of the Israeli society. Thank you both so much for being here, and thank you all for listening.